We all know the whispers, the late night stories shared around a fire, tales of things that crawl out of the dark, of perfect murders, and of secrets hiding in plain sight. We call them urban legends. They are dismissed as folklore, modern myths designed to give us a cheap thrill. But what if the terror in those stories was never invented? What if the most chilling concepts, the fear of being conscious underground, of bodies disappearing from graves, or of innocence brutally stripped away, are not modern fictions, but direct echoes of a terrifying, documented past? Welcome back to Omen Myths. Today, we are tearing back the veil of modern myth to expose the shocking historical realities that inspired the scariest legends we tell. We are not dealing with ghosts or monsters, but with human desperation, historical crime, and the brutal truth of the past. These urban legends are not just real, they are history's darkest confessions. Part 1. The Fear Below, the History of Taphophobia, and the Safety Coffin. And our first legend is one that taps into one of humanity's most primal fears: taphophobia, the paralyzing terror of being buried alive. This isn't just a dramatic device from a gothic novel. For centuries, this was a genuine, rational fear based on very real medical uncertainty. In the 18th and 19th centuries, medical science lacked the precise tools to definitively determine death. Without clear signs like the cessation of breathing or the absence of a heartbeat, doctors frequently mistook comas, severe epilepsy, cataleptic states, or even heavy sedation for death. The medical term for this, though largely sensationalized, was suspended animation. The cultural horror was immense. Tales circulated widely, often printed in newspapers, of bodies discovered after exhumation with scratch marks on the inside of the coffin lid, or even in the lining of the grave. Though many of these stories were exaggerations, the fear was so widespread and so intense that it fundamentally changed how people approached death and burial. This fear gave birth to a literal industry. The safety coffin, invented primarily during the Victorian era, these coffins were intricate, often ingenious devices designed to provide the supposed deceased with a means of escape, communication, or survival, should they wake up after the earth was placed over them. The designs ranged from the practical to the utterly absurd. Some designs included a glass viewing window placed directly over the face to allow light and inspection. More complex designs involved spring-loaded mechanisms connected to the coffin lid, or internal levers that, when moved, would release a flag or a flare above ground. The most iconic feature, however, was the alarm bell. A cord would be placed in the presumed corpse's hand, leading up through the coffin, through the earth, and connecting to a bell on top of the grave marker. A slight tug of the hand would alert any nearby watchman. This is, in fact, the grim origin of the common English phrase, "saved by the bell." Families often paid exorbitant amounts for these mechanisms, seeking peace of mind for themselves, not just comfort for the departed. The fear of being buried alive was so real that it was treated not as paranoia, but as a practical design problem requiring a technical solution. Though there are few, if any, fully authenticated accounts of a person being rescued by one of these mechanisms, their widespread invention and patenting throughout the 19th century stand as chilling historical testament to the terror of taphophobia. It was an urban legend that defined an entire era of burial rituals. Part 2. The Body Snatchers, the Resurrection Men's Trade. Our second urban legend takes us from the quiet graveyard to the dark streets of 19th century Britain, where a different, more chilling trade thrived. The legend is simple. Someone is stealing bodies from graves. The historical reality is that this was a full-scale, highly profitable, and entirely criminal industry driven by the rapid growth of medical science. In the early 1800s, medical schools, particularly in places like Edinburgh and London, were booming. Anatomical study required human bodies for dissection, but the law restricted the legal supply of cadavers almost exclusively to the bodies of executed criminals. This meant the supply was minuscule and the demand was astronomical. This massive imbalance created a black market. The criminals who supplied this market were known euphemistically as the resurrection men or body snatchers. Their technique was quick, dirty, and effective. They would wait a few days after a fresh burial, quickly dig down to the coffin, break a piece of the wood, and use a rope to pull the body out, leaving the empty coffin and the burial clothes behind. The clothes were often left to avoid a harsher charge of theft, as the body itself was considered legally ambiguous. The bodies fetched a high price, sometimes the equivalent of a month's wages for a working-class man, and no questions were asked by the anatomy schools. The public reaction was widespread panic. Families resorted to extreme measures to protect their loved ones. They hired armed guards to watch fresh graves, built huge iron cages known as mortsafus over the graves, and used massive stone slabs to seal the coffin deep underground. The cost of a mortsave was so high that it was often seen as an act of high status, protecting the wealthy from this terrifying violation. The horror escalated in 1828 with the notorious case of Burke and Hare in Edinburgh. These two men realized that digging up bodies was too much work and too risky. They developed a more efficient and infinitely more monstrous business model: murder. They began luring the vulnerable strangers, the poor and the elderly, back to their lodging house, quickly suffocating them, and then selling the fresh, undamaged bodies directly to the anatomy school run by Dr. Robert Knox. They committed at least 16 murders this way, supplying the medical demands of the day with a steady stream of fresh corpses. When the scheme was finally discovered, the public outrage was volcanic. Burke was tried and hanged, and his body was fittingly, publicly dissected. Hera turned king's evidence and was released. The terror of the resurrection men was not a myth. It was a terrifying, industrial-scale reality driven by the dark intersection of rapid scientific progress and legal limitations. Part 3. The Teeth of the Wolf. The brutal origins of fairy tales. Our final look at a dark legend is found in the stories we tell children. We think of fairy tales as stories of magic, princes, and happy endings. But the most popular tales, the ones we know from Disney or the sanitized versions by the Brothers Grimm, have origins that are far older, much darker, and often rooted in historical realities of survival, poverty, and brutality. The classic stories, told orally for generations before they were written down, were often tools of moral instruction, warnings about the dangers of the world, and grim reflections of the life in medieval and early modern Europe. Consider the classic story of Cinderella. The version, involves a lost glass slipper and a prince. The original version, recorded by the Brothers Grimm, is far more violent and horrifying. In that version, the evil stepsisters, desperate to fit their feet into the golden slipper, literally cut off parts of their own feet, one slicing off a heel, the other slicing off a toe, at the urging of their mother. Birds eventually exposed the deception by pointing to the blood. In the final act of the story, when Cinderella finally marries the prince, the birds peck out the eyes of the stepsisters, blinding them as punishment. This reflects a historical understanding of justice that was swift, biblical, and merciless. Or take Sleeping Beauty. The 17th century Italian version, Sun, Moon, and Talia, is a tale of utter horror. Talia's Sleeping Beauty falls into a deep sleep after pricking her finger. A passing king finds her and, being unable to wake her, sexually assaults her and leaves. She remains asleep but eventually gives birth to twins Sun and Moon. It is the children, searching for sustenance, who suck the splinter from her finger, waking her. The horror continues when the king's actual wife attempts to murder the children and feed them to the king. The themes here are not magic and romance, but rape, abandonment, and attempted cannibalism. Brutal realities of power dynamics in feudal courts. These historical tales, full of dismemberment, violence, abandonment, and cannibalism, were not meant to be light entertainment. They were brutal, cautionary warnings about the dangers outside the home, the cruelty of step-parents, a common reality due to high mortality rates, and the consequences of disobedience. The happy endings were largely additions made in the 19th and 20th centuries to soften the stories for a new, more sensitive middle-class audience. The horror is real. The simple, cheerful tales we tell children are actually the heavily edited remnants of history's most terrifying truths. From the panic that led to bells on coffins, to the dark trade of the body snatchers, and the brutal warnings hidden within our oldest stories, the fact remains, our darkest urban legends are not products of wild imagination. They are direct, unfiltered memories of a past where life was cheap, death was ambiguous, and morality was defined by desperation. These legends prove that history is often far more terrifying than fiction. Which of these historical realities do you find more terrifying? The body snatchers, or the original endings of those children's stories? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring that bell for your weekly dose of unbelievable true stories and historical deep dives. We are here to explore the past's darkest secrets. Thanks for watching Omen Myths.